You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
Well, folks, if you follow my Twitter feed or Facebook page at Radical Russ, you know this weekend was one hellacious one for me, let me tell you. And it got me to doing a lot of thinking about this movement and the people in it and how we're interacting with one another. And one thing that keeps coming up again and again, and I especially hear this from the grassroots, I hear this from supporters of many different organizations out there. Why can't we all get along? What's up with all the division? Everybody's being so divisive. Divisive. And I'd like to address that and maybe try to identify some of the ways in which we've become divisive and maybe suggest some ways that we can heal that. First of all, let's identify how divisiveness in the movement came about. When we look back to 1970, we have the founding of NORML, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, who supports and did support, will always support, the right of any person out there, any adult who is responsible to use cannabis. That's it. That right there is what we stand for. If you use cannabis, we support you. Enough. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and when I look at it, that is the most inclusive thing you could possibly say, isn't it? I don't care why you smoke pot. We support you. But as time went on, people started forming into different areas and different niches of marijuana reform. We saw the foundation of Marijuana Policy Project, which was people who were in NORML, staff members of NORML, who then cleaved away and became Marijuana Policy Project, focusing specifically on marijuana policy, just, changing laws, just the policies involved there. We saw the medical marijuana movement begin in the late 80s and the early 90s, where we used to have a group of 100% of the people who consume cannabis for whatever reason, and for the sake of politics, for the sake of getting something passed, we decided as a movement, and I'm not saying like there was a meeting and we voted on it, but this is what happened. We figured that we could pass laws so long as we took the sickest, most disabled pot smokers and found a way to get it passed for them. We changed our message from being, you have the right to consume cannabis, to you have the right to consume cannabis if you fit in a certain special protected class, in a certain special protected group. And then we saw in the 80s the rise of Jack Hare, the Emperor Wears No Clothes, and the reemergence of the American hemp movement, where another sliver of the pot smokers were cleaved away to say, well, we support your right to grow and use cannabis if it's being used for industrial purposes. And this has continued, and we've seen this in many different ways, in many different orgs and magazines. But the point I'm trying to make here is the divisiveness happened long ago when we started trying to define cannabis consumers or marijuana itself as something divisible. We had Brother Love and the rise of the religious use argument. We're using for ganja sacrament. It's okay that we use cannabis if we're worshiping a god or whatever, however you phrase that. That's where this divisiveness has come, is from people over time who got frustrated with the fact that legalization for all of us wasn't going to happen. Gosh, it's just not happening. We're not getting anywhere. And decided that, well, let's just go get legalization for some people. Let's just go get legalization under the First Amendment for religious use for some people. Let's go get legalization under affirmative defense for medical conditions for some people. So if people want to talk about divisiveness, I don't know how you're talking about NORML when we are the ones that support all of those uses, all of those people, the religious users, the medical users, the industrial users, and the people who just like to get high. Part of this, realization, epiphany, whatever you want to call it, was involved in the Twitter thing that I had over the weekend. And I want to apologize to people that follow me. I lost my cool, and I tell you, it was a real tough weekend for me. But what it revolved around, what kind of was the spark that lit the fuse for me, was when I was referring to an activist and saying that, we also support people like, and then I mentioned the activist, who are just young people who like to get high, or young people that like to smoke pot, or I don't remember how I phrased it. And this young activist got incensed, got furious that I would dare to refer to them being a user of cannabis for recreational purposes. And it got back into that whole patient thing. I'm medical. I'm using it. My if is more important. My if is special. Again, I don't care. I don't care why you smoke pot. I don't care. But the divisiveness happens when people like Stephen DeAngelo say, I don't support the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes. Because that if isn't valid. Your if is not good enough. The divisiveness happens when we try to say that there is such a thing as medical marijuana. Guess what, folks? There's no such thing as medical marijuana. There's no such thing as ganja sacrament. There's no such thing as industrial hemp. There is such thing as cannabis. And it's either legal or it's not legal. How you use it doesn't matter. If I were to set a bud on the table and around it put a picture of a Rastafarian, a guy in a wheelchair, a hippie with dreadlocks, and a guy in a suit, whose marijuana is it? How would you know by looking at the person and looking at the bud who that marijuana belongs to? It's not like medical marijuana is purple and ganja sacrament is red and consumer cannabis is pink and pot is blue. I mean, yeah, there's strains with different colors, but you get my point. Marijuana's fungible. I know, this all the way back from the Raich decision. Marijuana's fungible. It's pot. Pot is pot. It does not change from a medicine to a sacrament to a crime when it gets passed from hand to hand. It's the same pot. And we are the same people using it under the same right. I think it's time now for all of these disparate tribes, the hempsters, the medicalizers, the legalizers, the anarchists, whoever you are. It's time for us all to put that aside and say, look, as a recreational smoker, I don't get anywhere if all we do is concentrate on medical. You, as a medical user, will never get all the medical rights you deserve so long as cops are coming after me. You hempsters over there, they're not going to let you grow hemp so long as they think that I'm going to be growing pot in between it. Your religious users over there, you don't get to have your religious right because they think if you have your religious right, pot smokers like me are suddenly going to become religious. If we don't hang together, we will hang separately in this issue. It's time to recognize, and this is not to say that the individual groups and these groups with their particular agendas do not continue with those agendas because, much like Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, they have different jobs. Air Force flies planes, Navy runs ships, Army, fights on the ground, etc., right? But they're all in the same military. They're all in the same armed force fighting for the same country. And likewise, we in all these movements and all these groups are individual forces fighting particular battles in the theater, but we're all, or should all, be fighting the same war for the same thing, and that is to legalize cannabis. No ifs, just legalize cannabis for everyone. So it's going to lead me to changing a few of the ways that I think of things. Going back to language from the previous conversation too, the term medical marijuana, I'm going to start saying marijuana for medicinal use or marijuana being used medicinally. Medical marijuana implies that there are different kinds of marijuana. And if medical's the good one, then that implies that there's marijuana that's bad. I'm not going to say that anymore. Marijuana for industrial purposes, cannabis for industrial purposes, or just plain hemp. Those words will be just fine. And some other things that we can learn how to say. One of the terms that I was thinking about that I feel is kind of weird and divisive is the term medical marijuana patient. Think about that term for a second. Medical marijuana patient. Usually when you say patient, think of some of the other ways that you say patient. cancer patient, AIDS patient, glaucoma patient, pain patient, MS patient. Don't we usually describe someone being a patient based on their condition, not on their medicine? I don't remember anybody ever being called an insulin patient. They're called diabetics. I don't remember anyone being called an OxyContin patient. They're called, chronic pain sufferers or whatever. The only drug I could think of where we name a person a patient based on their use of the drug is methadone patient. And in that case, they're using methadone to get off the addiction to heroin. So maybe medical marijuana patient is just a weird term. How about patient who uses marijuana medicinally? Or patient using marijuana? Because by saying medical marijuana patient, I think we once again make a false distinction between people that use cannabis. And it leads to that idea that, well, I'm a patient and I have to use cannabis. You're just a recreational smoker and you can choose not to. Why should I have to choose not to? If it's a right, it's a right. Saying that I should have to choose not to exercise a right just because I'm healthy, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I've been thinking a lot about this divisiveness and about getting people together, and I want to bring in other people to talk about this. If you'd like to get on the phone and call us in our next hour, phone number is 971-533-7111. You are the stakeholders in this. Tell us in leadership what we need to do, how we need to fix this. What can we do to better serve our constituency? It's time we start doing it. It's 2012 already. It's time to legalize. All right, folks, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us here for the first hour. And those of you on the podcast, thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you tomorrow. On tomorrow's podcast, Todd Armstrong in from the road for Todd's Toker Topics and more. So check that out. It's also Electric Tuesday. Get you some great dance music. Stay tuned for A Different View live tonight at 8 o'clock. And for Cannabis Carrying Ganja John, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is NORML Show Live, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Take it on one more time. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.